Take a moment to think about the concept of stewardship. This might conjure up ideas of responsible financial management, or perhaps remind you of lessons on ethics and good conduct from your schooling days. Perhaps you're reminded of the duty to look after resources or property that others have entrusted to you. Well, now let's take this idea of looking after resources, add the principles of ethical conduct, and combine it with the environment. How well are we currently stewarding what we call our natural capital? How are we maintaining our natural environment and healthy ecosystems that underpin our global economy and society, now and in the future? In essence, how can we take a regular dividend from this capital in the form of essential goods and services it provides without digging deep into our capital reserves? Author and independent sustainability and environment advisor Tony Juniper will help shed some light on these matters. Tony is a CISL Fellow and has authored a number of sustainability related books, including the award-winning bestseller What Has Nature Ever Done For Us? Through this interview, you will gain a better understanding of what natural resource stewardship is, how to ensure healthy ecosystems, the scope of the challenge we're facing in these areas, and some practical solutions to these challenges.
What is sometimes not evident to many decision makers is the fact that 100% of our economic activity is dependent upon services being provided by natural systems. From the oxygen that we breathe in the atmosphere, through to the capture of carbon dioxide into soils and into forests, through to the replenishment of fresh water, the recycling of nutrients that enables agriculture to happen. All of these things are being done for free by natural ecosystems and ecosystem services that we benefit from. The more we degrade the natural systems that are providing these benefits, the more in the end we begin to imperil economic activity and indeed business success. We know this is a problem because of a range of international processes, expert reviews that have told us the state of ecosystems is changing. So for example, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, effectively a global stocktake of the state of nature globally, tells us that ecosystems ranging from tropical rainforests through to coral reefs are declining both in area and in quality because of a number of pressures, including the destruction of those habitats and the impacts of climate change. We know, moreover, that this is a problem arising from an expert review called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, TEEB for short. That told us how the degradation of nature is already causing economic costs, and these are set to grow into the future in line with the continuing decline of these systems. The problem is absolutely immense, and it's growing following the explosive economic growth that's taken place since the middle of the 20th century, and which of course continues. And you can see this reflected in the rate of deforestation, especially across the tropics, where we're still losing an area of tropical rainforest about the size of England every year. That is putting massive carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and is undermining water security and food security. The scale of soil damage worldwide is absolutely immense and continuing. About 1/3 of the agricultural soils have been severely degraded since the middle of the 20th century. Erosion, the depletion of organic matter, compaction are the kinds of characteristics of that. That is a major threat to long-term food production. We can see the loss of carbon coming from ecosystems ranging from blanket bogs to coastal marshes, and we can see the depletion of fish stocks in many parts of the world now. Not only are the biomass, the breeding stocks of fish depleted, in some places they've completely collapsed. On top of all of this, perhaps the ultimate symptom of ecosystem decline is the rate of species loss, which has accelerated to the point today where it's between 100 and 1,000 times more rapid than the natural background rate. This cannot continue. It is literally unsustainable. And if we are going to be able to reverse these trends, never mind halt them, we need to change business strategies as a matter of urgency. The pace of change taking place in ecosystems now is already causing implications for business. One of the most obvious examples is in relation to the decline in the availability of fresh water in different parts of the world. So for example, tropical rainforests, there is a clue in the name. They're not only dependent on large amounts of rainfall to keep them moist, they also put moisture into the atmosphere that forms rain clouds. The more we cut down these systems, the more we imperil the water cycle. This obviously has ramifications for a range of sectors. For instance, tropical agriculture. In some parts of the world, extreme droughts are already causing impacts on, for example, cocoa productivity. In some parts of the world, reduced river flow arising from reduced rainfall is causing hydroelectric dams to produce less power. These things inevitably have consequences for business. So does the loss of soils, which are obviously vital for agriculture. So does the loss of ecosystems which hold water in the environment, like wetlands and peat bogs. When these are degraded, water runs off more quickly, causing flooding, in turn causing interruptions to business and, of course, costs to certain sectors, including the insurance sector. The extent to which governments are beginning to understand the implications of this decline in ecosystem health is actually quite new. For many years, we've had the establishment of national parks. We've had quite narrow environmental regulations to, for example, improve river water quality or to protect the best areas for wildlife. But we've not really understood the fundamental dependencies between the economy and ecosystem health until quite recently. This is now beginning to change. For example, in Brazil, there is now more of an awareness in the government as to the role of rainforests in producing river flow that enables the provision of a whole range of services ranging from agriculture through to power generation. We have in the United Kingdom the establishment of a natural capital committee, which is trying to put some kind of economic value on these natural services so that they can be made more visible in economic decision making. Because part of the problem up until now has been that we've seen the environment and the economy as separate. But new work, including that amongst some governments, is beginning to put two and two together to show that if we do wish to have economic growth and development into the future, then we do have to protect and indeed to restore ecosystems to do that. One example of where natural capital and ecosystem damage is already causing economic stresses is in the grain growing belt of North America on the Great Plains of South Dakota, for example, where the quality of the soil there has been declining over many years because of intensive cropping, reducing the organic material in the soil. This in turn is reducing its ability to hold water and is also leading to soil erosion. These two things together threaten both long-term food security and also downstream environmental impacts. For example, as the soil is leaving the fields and going into the river basin of the Mississippi, it's causing more flooding as the riverbed builds up with silt. It's also causing major damage to the fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico as agricultural chemicals travel thousands of miles through the river and into the sea. This cascade of connections is arising from unsustainable farming, which is damaging the very basis of its future. Ultimately, the soil. Things can be done to improve that, but only when we can see that there is a real economic value between protecting the environment and what we need to do as societies. There are a whole range of very important reasons why businesses need to be taking this question of ecosystem health very seriously indeed. One of the reasons, of course, is reputational risk. Many companies over many years have suffered really quite serious harm to their brands and indeed to their markets as a result of not paying attention to these kinds of questions. Consumer boycotts, for example, business-to-business relationships breaking down as a result of being involved in deforestation, damaging the ecosystems that are building the rain clouds that are providing so many benefits. If you're a company doing that, you put yourself in potentially a very dangerous position. There's also risks coming from the continuing supply of raw materials. Companies in cocoa and coffee supply chains have already seen volatility in their supplies over recent years arising from droughts, soil damage, and the fact that as a result of people being able to make less money because of these stresses, they're leaving the industry. No farmers, no crop long term. This is a major issue already. There's also the extent to which there is now a very serious attention to these questions coming from governments. If your business model is dependent upon clearing more forest to grow more soybeans or more beef to put into a growing global supply chain, and then governments say you can't do that anymore, then obviously your business model becomes threatened. There's also the issue of making investments into industries that may not have a long-term future. For example, a hydroelectric dam being built in a tropical rainforest area right now, at a time when the forest is still being cleared, will lead to a long-term risk as the river flow goes down. It won't be able to make the power needed to be able to get the return on the investment. It becomes a stranded asset. And similarly with agricultural lands being purchased or leased by companies, when the rainfall stops or when the soil becomes depleted, again, it becomes a stranded asset. All these things are beginning to build towards an investor case as well, and some investors now are looking at these long-term risks as material to the extent to which they will put money behind certain kinds of endeavours. Put all this together, and this is no longer something which is future or theoretical. It's real, it's now, and it constitutes a major risk. There are many, many examples now of where 2 and 2 has been put together and the right answer has been arrived at, namely that looking after ecosystems is good for business. One of the examples in this country is how the water sector is now restoring soil health as a way of ensuring future supplies of clean water at lower cost than would be the case arising from business as usual. So South West Water is rebuilding some of the blanket bogs on Dartmoor to purify water through natural systems rather than having to spend a lot of money on technologies and chemicals to do the job after the event. We see fishing businesses worldwide now investing in the restoration of the marine environment in order to not only sustain fish stocks but to grow them, leading to a bigger return on investment down the line. We see companies in tropical commodity supply chains from paper to beef to soya to cocoa investing in the protection of forests because they know this is one of the ways in which they're going to be able to do a long-term growth strategy. All of this is beginning to make a very compelling business case. It's not necessarily simple, but when companies see the light, they can actually build the partnerships and the strategies to do this. And this is not something which is, again, a theoretical future opportunity. It's happening now.
From listening to Tony's insights, it's clear that our ecosystems and natural resource stocks are in trouble. And that is going to take a global effort and local action to correct these problems and instill positive changes. A number of organisations are already starting to develop innovative solutions, and in the decades that follow, there will certainly be an increase in expectation that organisations will take much more responsibility to address these issues in their own operations and spheres of influence. What is your organisation currently doing to steward its natural capital stocks? What about your impacts and dependencies in your surrounding ecosystems? Could any of the solutions that Tony shared with us be applicable to your organisation? And if not, what else could your organisation do differently? Did you understand all of the concepts in this video? If you'd like to review any of the questions, click on the corresponding button.